Too often today, people are ready to tell us, this is not possible, that is not possible. I say, whatever the true interest of our country calls for is always possible.
For the first time on television, we've assembled the recorded fragments of speech to better understand Powell's argument.
In this country, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
Powell claimed the most incendiary remarks were quotations from concerned constituents. But he knew how controversial the speech was going to be.
Well, I can already hear the chorus of execration. How dare I say such a horrible thing? How dare I stir up trouble and inflame feelings by repeating such a conversation? My answer is that I do not have the right not to do so.
Powell saw himself as a radical visionary, more in tune with the feelings of the masses than with his colleagues.
Enoch Powell had the gift of prophetic utterance. He had the gift of language and of mind to make prophetic statements from the mountain, which people listened to.
Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad.
He was a curiously intense man. Certainly a loner, certainly highly intelligent, certainly very confident of his own views and with deeply held views, and very determined that they should be heard. There was, in that sense, something of a missionary about him.
Powell was a conviction politician. He'd already resigned from a previous Conservative government over economic policy.
He was somebody who took a point, elaborated it, and was led by it to its own implied conclusion. And as a philosopher, I admired that. That's the way one should think if one's interested in truth. But if one's interested in persuading people, then of course that might be a mistake. People are often frightened by logic. They're frightened by the truth also.
We must be mad, literally mad as a nation, to be permitted the annual inflow of some 50,000 dependents who are, for the most part, the material of the future growth of the immigrant-descended population. It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pile.
How can you fetch more in when you haven't got enough housing, enough schools, the National Health Service is going to put over them? This is why we're doing it, because Enoch Powell spoke the truth, and he's been sacked for it. This race relation issue goes well beyond the field of politics and trade union matters. This is an issue of national importance, as important to us as Dunkirk. And what is the issue about? The issue is not coloured immigration, but the denial of free speech to us, the English, in our own land. Enoch for Prime Minister!
Discrimination and the deprivation, the sense of alarm and of resentment lie not with the immigrant population, but with those among whom they have come and are still coming. This is why to enact legislation of the kind before Parliament at this moment is to risk throwing a match onto gunpowder.
A lot of people say you're a racialist. Would you admit in any sense of the word to being a racialist?
First of all, I must define it. Because if by being a racialist you mean be conscious of differences between men and nations, some of which coincide with differences of race, then we're all racialist, I would have thought. But if by a racialist you mean a man who despises a human being because he belongs to another race, or a man who believes that one race is inherently superior to another in civilization or capability of civilization, then the answer is emphatically no. That is entertained by those who vociferously demand legislation, as they call it, against discrimination. Whether they be leader writers of the same kidney and sometimes on the very same newspapers as those which year after year in the 1930s tried to blind this country to the rising peril which confronted it, or archbishops who live in palaces faring delicately with the bedclothes pulled right up over their heads.
By 1970, 2 years after his speech, Powell's future hung in the balance. The Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, called a general election. If the Tories lost, Powell could challenge Heath for leadership of the party. But Heath won a surprise victory, and Powell's frontline career was over.
Many people are asking, where does Enoch Powell go from here? You're 61 next June, and there's certainly no chance of you going back into the cabinet while Mr. Heath is Prime Minister.
So he says.
A voice in the wilderness, then.
Wildernesses are good places, I notice, for voices. They tend to get a reverberation which is often lost in the more crowded places.
Good evening. Politicians and former colleagues have been paying tribute to Enoch Powell. His supporters viewed him as the greatest statesman of his day and a possible future Prime Minister.
In 1998, Enoch Powell died. All political careers end in failure, he had once remarked. His, forever associated with the rivers of blood speech, appeared to be no exception. The strong British identity which he had championed had lost out to the multicultural vision. Britain, it was even said, was now a community of communities. But events were about to bring Powell's thinking centre stage once more.
The rioting lasted for over 7 hours. At times, hundreds of Asian youths were hurling bricks and petrol bombs at the police. Officers were shocked by the rage and the ferocity of the fighting.
In 2001, Asian men, mainly Muslims, rioted in Oldham, Bradford and Burnley. They claimed they were racially provoked and economically disadvantaged.
Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad.
In his Rivers of Blood speech, Powell had warned that mass migration would lead to segregation. A report into the riots concluded that the white and Asian populations were living a series of parallel lives. There was a lack of shared values uniting multicultural Britain. Powell had prophesied that mass migration would lead first to segregation and then inevitably to disastrous racial and religious division.
It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre.
This is London, 9:47 on a midsummer morning. The terrified voices are those of mourning commuters. Some of them terribly wounded.
In 2005, 4 Muslim suicide bombers raised in multicultural Britain killed 52 people in London.
Your democratically elected governments continuously perpetuate atrocities against my people all over the world, and your support of them makes you directly responsible. We are at war, and I am a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
Powell would have, I think, said that this was an inevitable consequence of what he was warning about. That if you have such large numbers of people from another culture coming to this country that they cannot possibly integrate, then they will go their own way. The fact we have all these tensions, to my mind, justifies exactly what Powell said.
The word on the street is apprehension. The word on the street is that people are leaving if they can. If you look at the composition of people going, it's because they don't actually like largely what's happening to this country.
The sense of alarm and of resentment lie not with the immigrant population, but with those among whom they have come and are still coming.